This is a Sports Radio Live podcast covering your world of sports. Bryan Houston's Sports Radio Live. It's weekdays at 3 on 99.3 Talk FM, the talk of East Texas.
From the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, Mac Engel. How you doing, Mac?
I'm great. Brian, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. I go on vacation. You let the Mavericks go to hell. What happened?
I've never seen an implosion like this, a deliberate implosion like this, since the Florida Marlins after they won the World Series in whatever year that was, when they bought that championship team with free agents and then destroyed it.
Twice.
I cannot believe. Yeah, I can't believe it happened the way it happened.
What
it
happened?
Is stunning to me. Well, I think and what's crazy about it, Brian, is that this was less than a year. This was 6 months. It began in December. Remember, NBA's free agency began because of the lockout last December. So the Mavs, in 6 months, completely gutted a championship roster. Now, the reality is it was an old roster to begin with, but then they managed to get worse and older in the process.
And that takes talent to do that.
That's not easy. Not everybody can do that. I think, Brian, what happened, and Mark Cuban, when he saw the new collective bargaining agreement, and he kept saying this, was nobody understands this new CBA. Now, Mark's always the smartest guy in the room, and you do have to give him this. This is a very bright man who's done very well professionally, and led the turnaround of what had been a really, really bad NBA franchise. So you have to give him that. He does have cred in that regard, but he kept saying we can't go out, and this was regards to Tyson Chandler when he was a free agent. He said we can't do this because if we're over the limit, we're going to get hammered. And he kept saying, no one wants to look at this, no one wants to look at this, you don't understand. And he may be right about that. The thing that I kept hammering was, while you're right about that, you have one of the NBA's best players that you won a championship with, and he has about a year or two left in his prime, and you're going to blow it.
Yeah.
You're not, and I understand there's the business side of it, but I also understand the winning side of it, and that is when you get that player that are so hard to find, they're so rare, and when you get them, you better take advantage of it, because when he's gone, and there's no guarantee you're going to find him again anytime soon. So they cleared all this cap space out, and the hope, not the hope, the plan to sign Darren Williams to come home for $25 million less. He says no, the whole thing falls apart. Everybody's gone, and the problem is now, Brian, when you look at this, and it's what you and I talked about this 6 months ago, he was never coming here.
Yeah.
You and I never believed he was coming here.
Well, the thing that's blowing my mind, Mac, when did Dallas become Milwaukee? Nobody wants to come here.
It's not just Dallas becoming Milwaukee. I wrote this the other day, and if you're not on the East, if you're not on one of the coasts, or you're on Lake Michigan, you better draft them. You better draft them or trade for them because they're not signing here. They don't want to live here. Milwaukee could be Dallas. It could be Houston. It could be San Antonio. Look at what the Spurs built. The Spurs built to the draft with incredibly shrewd picks. That's the best way to do it. And the Mavs, even though they've had some luck with guys like that, the one that springs to mind is J.J. Barea. You better get better guys. That's how you're going to have to do it. There's no other way, because now you're looking at, you have to go to the top of the draft. And the way this roster is right now, it's old and it's not very good. You've got Vince Carter, you've got Brendan Haywood, Dirk, who's 34, and obviously can still play. Dirk will make this team a legit contender for the 8th seed by himself. You've got Roddy Dubois and Sean Marion, who I think is 33. I don't know what there's now. You look around, what's left. They don't have enough pieces to trade for Dwight Howard, and it looks as if you believe the reports according to Yahoo, it looks as if he's going to be traded to Brooklyn. So now he's off the table. You've got all this salary cap space to sign free agents in the summer of 2013 when Dwight Howard is supposed to be a free agent, when Chris Paul is supposed to be a free agent. Do you think, given what we've seen in history, that either one of these guys is going to sign with the Dallas Mavericks?
No. But the thing that I've always heard was that it's always about the money. Well, Mark's got money, and the guys are still leaving. They're still turning it away.
Yeah, and I don't. Dallas is a great place to live. They just don't want to come here. And it's their right. You can't blame them. It's Mark Cuban's right to say, listen, I want to make a fiscally responsible decision regarding my roster. I want flexibility. That's his right. But you know what? The reality of it is when you get that player, you better not blow it. You better take advantage of it. And my fear is that I think they blew it.
So now what do they do? I mean, do they need to trade Dirk and get just as bad as possible?
I think that will be the storyline, unfortunately, for 2012, 2013, Brian. Will be the trade deadline, and what do the Mavs do with Dirk? You know, the one that comes to mind is Clyde Drexler with the Blazers. You know, Drexler was near the end of his career. He had a great run there with those really good Rip City teams in the early '90s. When it was Jerome Kersey and Buck Williams and Kevin Duckworth, and then it was starting to fall apart and go bad. And the Blazers traded Drexler to the Rockets, and he won a title with Hakeem. Well, you know, obviously Dirk has been the center point of this great 12-year run here in Dallas. But given the way this roster looks and the way the rebuilding word may be applied to the franchise, to the Mavs, do Dirk a favor, and it's going to be at his request or his permission, because the Mavs aren't going to trade this guy without his consent. There's no way. And do they do it and say, okay, Dirk, now you can go to, I don't know, pick a team, Indiana, wherever. I mean, this is a guy it's going to be tough for Dirk. I mean, this is no different than anybody else. He's a creature of comfort. He's been in Dallas since he moved from Germany. This is the only team he's ever known. He can do whatever he wants. He's beloved here. He can hide here. He's not expected to do anything other than be himself. You know, they don't ask very much of him to do anything other than be a good player, because he's a good guy. He's not the most visible, NBA superstar. He's reluctant at it at best. So that's your one piece that you could move for value. I don't know. That will, unfortunately for the Mavs, the way it's shaping up, it's whether or not they decide to do it and really try to go to the top of the draft and get a guy. Because if you're not going to get a free agent, there's no other way to get him.
What do you think was going through his mind when A, Steve Nash decided to go to New York, and B, Jason Kidd decided to leave?
I don't know. It's a good question, Brian. I mean, he's not. He had talked before free agency began at that softball charity event in Frisco, Texas, and he said, we're not a rebuilding team. I think he thought the Mavs had a good shot at Darren Williams. They did, and he said today or yesterday to a reporter that that Darren Williams really did struggle with the decision, that it wasn't necessarily about the money. I don't know if I buy that. But that when the Nets landed Joe Johnson, that he figured, you know what, we've got a team that can compete. I'll stay in Brooklyn. They're going to Brooklyn. It's going to be a new arena. I'll give it a shot. That left Dirk holding the bag. Jason Kidd all of a sudden says, you know what, instead of staying here in Dallas and backing up Darren Williams, I'll go to the Knicks. Brian, Dirk told Jason Kidd, go ahead, go to the Knicks. Then Steve Nash decides to go to they swing a deal to L.A.
I said New York, but it's L.A.
Now you're left without a point guard. What is Dirk thinking? This is a guy who said right after the playoffs ended, I'm too old to rebuild. If he's too old to rebuild, then he's got to be on another team, because I don't know what else the Mavs can do.
Well, while we're talking, today is Tom Hanks' birthday, and I looked up the clip. There's no crying in baseball. How do you feel about the Rangers at the halfway mark?
I don't know how you could be disappointed with them. I mean, given all the injuries that they faced, between Josh Hamilton being off and on hurt, between Derek Holland being hurt, Alexi Ogando being hurt, Neftali Feliz being hurt, there's 2 starters and a half being hurt. And they're, 4 games up in first place?
Yeah.
I don't see how you can be anything other than pleased. I mean, this thing was all about October anyways, and right now they're on track to get to October. I think the big thing is, Brian, they've got to win that stupid All-Star game. If they have to win it. That they have to win that game, because if they win that game, and I say the Rangers have to win the All-Star game, they've got 8 All-Stars, so they have to win that game. And make sure that when the time comes, if they get to the World Series again, and I'm not so sure they will, just because it's hard, that Game 6 this time is in Texas. I mean, you look back at that when I look back at that World Series, you get so frustrated, not just because of Game 6, but because of the rain delay for Game 7 that allowed Chris Carpenter to pitch. I mean, all these different things that just chap you behind. And now here we are sitting on July 8th or 9th, whatever today is, and we still got to wait another 3 months to make that right, to make that wrong right. So if you're going to do it, you better give your chance. And I think they've done that between signing Yu Darvish, signing Roy Oswalt, and now they've got to go out and win this stupid fake exhibition game.
Now, the other question I asked, and I asked Smokey about this last hour, you've got a situation where you've got riches in the minor leagues system. You got Profors, the shortstop. You got Martin Perez. Would you trade either one of these guys or both of them for a guy like a Zach Greinke or or Cole Hamels? Do the Rangers need to do that?
Well, I think if you looked at if you're going based on what the playoff pitching performance last season, their starters got away with murder. Until Game 7 of the World Series, they walked everybody. They just kept walking guys, and eventually it killed them. So the question is, do you think that the Rangers have a hammer? Do they have a Chris Carpenter? Do they have a guy who can go out and you can put the ball in his glove and say, you need to go win us this game? C.J. Wilson can't do it.
No.
He couldn't do it last year, and he couldn't. It was too big for him. It was too much. He couldn't do it. Can Matt Harrison do it? I don't know. I've always been a big believer in Derek Collins' talent, but he's been injured this year, so you have to think, it's probably not. Yu Darvish, it's there. You know it's there. Can they rely on one of those guys? It's not Roy Oswalt. It's just not there anymore. As good as he's been, I think he's been pretty good, but he's not that guy anymore. So is anybody on that team, can they do that? And is it worth one of those prospects that you mentioned to deal a guy to go to make sure that whoever that they have in the starting rotation is going to go 7 and not walk everybody? Because one of the things that you saw last year in that playoffs is eventually that bullpen was asked to do too much, and it fell apart.
Burned them up.
It did. So would I do it? I hate trading prospects. I really, really do.
I do too.
But you're trading the unknown for the known. And I don't know, like Greinke worries me. I think the guy's a freak. I don't know if I deal for Greinke. I'd be more inclined to deal for Cole Hamels just because he's been there before and he's done it. I don't know if the Phillies are going to move him. They're probably going to want the moon, and as they should. But I think what you got to look at is do you trust the guys that you have in your rotation to be able to concentrate and not give in and walk guys the way that staff did last year? And if you can, then you'd be happy with what you got, and you go from there. Bigger
than that is, can you trust these guys to be in the rotation at the end of the season? It's been real hard to keep them together this year.
Yeah, and then last year was a fluke. None of those guys missed starts. That was one of the most amazing things that team did last year. Is that their starters were going every 5th day without injury. It was amazing, and that wasn't going to hold up. There's no way. But at this point, it's July, and you do have. Now the clock's ticking towards the end of the month and the trade deadline. So I think, given the reality of Nelson Cruz and his contract, and Josh Hamilton and his contract, Michael Young's age is now. You have to sort of kick that around, and his possible replacement, because he's got another year left on his deal. I think you do have to look at this. But the question I think the Rangers have to ask themselves is, do they go for it? Everything that they've done says they're going for it. So if they're going to go for it, then go for it. Deal one of those guys and get one of those pitchers that you mentioned to come in here and be that guy that you don't think is ready to be the lockdown hammer that they haven't proven to be yet.
All right, good deal, Mac. Hey, great talking to you today, buddy. Thank you.
Okay, Brian. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
You too. Mac Engel, Fort Worth Star-Telegram on Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live on 99.3 Talk FM.
This is a Sports Radio Live podcast covering your world of sports. Bryan Houston Sports Radio Live. It's weekdays at 3 on 99.3 Talk FM, the talk of East Texas.